Hello! Welcome back to One More Quest, number 4! We're at the 1 month anniversary! Awesome. 1 month of being creative and generative, and it's feeling great. I'm absolutely loving it. It's kept me busy during my home life. I'm doing things that I find fulfilling, and I'm not just sitting there vegging out in front of a screen. I love my screens. They're a dear part of my life. But it's great to have some more control over my own life. So that's been awesome. So we're going to talk today about a fun scenario that I thought was pretty fun and had some really great role-playing opportunities and stuff, depending on the choices that the player makes. I call this one the Barge. This is a scenario involving a sea hag. And let's go ahead and dive on in. So at this point, the players have been investigating some sort of problem going on with the town. I introed it very fast, just saying, hey, I was playtesting this with a level 3 druid character, solo player once again, and he, I said, hey, you're in charge of this local area. They come to you saying, hey, things have been getting weird, like people have been killing each other for no reason in our town, and that's bizarre. No one ever really does that here. And people find untold wealth, and a bunch of fish have been dying on the shore. It's really weird, and we kind of need your help. And that was all I needed. Also saying that you interview some of these people, and they say that some of the people that have been having the worst of the problems have been making deals with some old woman that lives on the coast. So, there we go. Intro done. He is in front of the coast now. Described a large ship that had kind of crashed onto a rock and been pierced by it. So it's, stuck and anchored onto there with the waves crashing on it. With, dark black wood and dark brown wood that looks kind of black with big barnacles, white chalky barnacles all over, and seaweed hanging over the top. As well, something seems a little bit off about the wood, and he couldn't really tell from a distance until he made a fantastic perception roll, and he could tell that the wood that made up the ship looked like it had been magically warped into a bunch of screaming, contorted faces. Super spooky, and it set things off to be the right tone for this, which is this is going to be a really kind of a spooky scenario of this is not a good guy's area of habitation. As well, on the shore in front of the boat are just dozens and dozens of dead and rotting fish. So, the players have options here of how they want to try and approach the barge. How do they want to gain entry? I did give my player a little hint that there was some sort of magic swirling around the barge. And he decided to waltz up into it, and he got repulsed and blown backwards with some protective runes that do 1d10 damage. He only took 1 damage. He rolled really well. And then I had the magical energies sharply coalesce into like these rigid geometrical patterns. And as he looked up after being blown back 10 feet, he saw that 1/3 of these shapes kind of faded away, and the other 2 kept on swirling around the entrance to the barge. And at that point, I also had the dead fish that were on the ground start kind of flopping and flapping, and they kind of pointed towards the door. Just a couple of them, just enough to be really spooky and weird. The alternative entry point here is picking up one of those fish and using it like a telephone to talk with the hag, the sea hag. She will respond in a fishy, gurgly, underwater type sort of voice. Yes, what do you want? What is it? And if the player asks to come in, that they have a deal that they want to make, then she will invite them in and allow them to come in to the barge unharmed. Otherwise, the heroes can keep on trying to blow away the protective runes in front of the ship. After 3 times, the runes disappear and the traps are finished. My player actually was fairly smart as far as that goes. He threw the sling, so big rocks at them, and I just had them explode. And if he rolled really poorly on it, then like part of it would explode and shrapnel back on him for like 1d4 damage, but that didn't end up happening. In between each shot, I tried to give him more and more clues that there's something going on with these fish. So after the first time he threw the rock at it, so the second time that the trap got sprung, I had all the fish all of a sudden turn to him and start flapping and looking at him. And he just kind of ignored them, didn't ever investigate them at all. I also had like one representative fish kind of go and making kind of sort of half-word noises like hello, 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 hello. He didn't quite pick up on it. You'll be able to think of something better. Yeah, so either way, they gain entrance into the ship. The ship is subdivided into 3 main areas. It's not a huge ship, but it's got, it's the floor, it's an upturned ship. So what was once the ceiling is now the floor, and it is kind of covered with a couple inches of water at the start of the ship, and it's kind of slanted. So the further down you go in the ship, the more higher up the water goes. And there's broken stuff just everywhere, like barrels and crates that are just torn open. There's seaweed coming in from the ceiling. There's, fishing nets and all sorts of buoys and random seafaring baubles just kind of strewn about everywhere, and like a lone oil lamp that may be very dimly lit. And in this first room, the players will meet the chaperone. The chaperone is the servant of the sea hag. He is a flesh golem. And if you know flesh golems, or golems in general, they're pretty tough. So if they barge their way in by tripping all the runes, the chaperone will immediately attack. I had him as a flesh golem that is like haphazardly dressed in like off-kilter pirate clothes and a tricorn hat that the sea hag found on the bodies of the sailors that washed up on this thing, and she kind of like stitched them together and formed this flesh golem. Now that is a CR 5. That's really tough. I had this as a level 3 solo encounter, so I toned down the flesh golem a lot. A sea hag itself is only CR 2, so it doesn't make sense that she would have something quite so strong, although in Volo's Guide to Monster, that's listed as one of the servants of a hag, but there doesn't seem to be any sort of qualifier for, the weaker hags. So I toned down the flesh golem a lot. I had him kind of rotting and like stitches being loose and everything. Still hit like a truck though. I took his hit points down to 30 instead of like 90 or whatever they are, and then gave him only 1 attack per round, dealing 1d8 damage instead of 2d8 damage. That was too much for the player. He also didn't quite pick up on the fire vulnerability, and he was a druid that was just kind of hacking at him with a sword. Kind of a new player, didn't really understand how to use the druid abilities super tightly. So your mileage may vary, but this may be more appropriate to run with a group of players or to do some more canoodling with the stats to try and make them a bit lower. Because my player dropped in like 3 combat rounds and did like 10 damage to this golem. I'll go to the narrative of what happened with him, but then swap back to the way it kind of was supposed to go down should he have been victorious. As he got, backhanded by this flesh golem and bashed into the side of the boat, his head hit a statue that was kind of precariously perched there, and he starts to go unconscious as this flesh golem starts dragging him through the mucky water over to a door. And this door looks like it had a bunch of gems in it, and he pulled out this circular gem, fits it in, and light beams around the door as it opens, and the character fades unconscious, and then he wakes up again and he sees large octopus tentacles snaking out of a nearby door and then slithering back as the door closes. And then going unconscious again and waking up, and he's now on a table. And that's I skipped him ahead to the very end of the hag's lair. So pause there. Rewind back to where they are if they have beaten the golem. Or alternatively, if they use the telephone fish, the chaperone will invite them in and will open the door for them and move them forward. Now, if the players kill the flesh golem, then they've got a bit of a puzzle on their hands. They're going to have to search this flesh golem down to try and find the key, which is that round, shiny jewel. Embedded in the door that is separating this room from the next one are 5 separate jewels, along with a space for a 6th one. These all represent different hags of a coven. This lair being presumably the weakest of the hags. She's not even an auntie, let alone a mother or a granny. And she is a member of this coven with some nefarious plans. We'll get to that at the very end. But the key to this is slotting the gem that the chaperone has on him into that empty spot, and that will open the door. I also said that like the wood was like unnaturally warped around those 6 gems in this kind of spiral sort of shape. Just once again, give it a bit of magical mysticism and a little bit of spookiness. It's not carved, it's like someone like gripped the wood and wrenched it around and it stayed there, you know? That sort of odd, almost as if it were clay magic sort of weirdness. The next room is my favorite room in this entire dungeon, because it is the room of Mr. Hansy, who is a giant octopus. It is a giant octopus who is constantly just sorting bottles on various shelves with all these different tonics and bottles with obscured shapes in them and trinkets, just constantly moving things around, trying to fulfill some duty that, only he seems to understand what is supposed to be happening. And the hag will speak through him and try and convince the players that that's the hag. So, it's going to have the same voice as the hag. Yes, what is it? And all the while sorting. It never stops sorting things. And the players can then try and talk to it. They can try and attack it and carve their way through. This is a room which is a really big question mark. I don't really know how it's going to go down. And yet, it ended up being one of the great pieces of that scenario that I just ran through of the player getting knocked unconscious and being dragged straight through this room. It ended up being a big deal. I'll get to it in just a little bit. Should the players kill Mr. Hansy, then they will find behind him is like this large seashell covering the back wall. That is in fact a door. If they kind of shove it aside a little bit, there's an entryway into another room. And this is the true lair of the hag, of the sea hag. And arriving in there, they will find her caressing this rotting fish. And she gets spooked when they come in. She kind of skitters backwards and starts to try and talk to the players and offer them deals. For the druid that got dragged there, he was pushed down onto a table and magically restrained. When the hag was gone, he woke up, regained some hit points, and he was a super buff Dragonborn druid, and he ripped his arms out of a magical enchantment that the hag had placed on him, with shards of magical energy flying everywhere, as the chaperone came out of the shadows and lunged on him and made a grapple attack and shoved him to the table in time for... There was a little bit of combat there. He threw some fire spells at him, and that did a lot of damage to him until he eventually did go and pin him back down again, just in time for the sea hag to arrive. And the hag and the flesh golem had a great little piece of dialogue between them. And how is our new visitor? Was he a good boy? And then the flesh golem goes, no! With like his hair all singed and flesh all burned and everything. It was great. It was a great little moment. And the hag tries to tempt the druid, saying, you want to protect nature. Those humans in that civilization, their rapacious desires, I can prevent them from causing any more harm. And he almost went for it. He said, yeah, you're gonna kill them. And I had her like shove her face right next to his, with big wide scales all around her eyes and nasty anglerfish mouth and big empty fish eyes, as she said, I swear I won't harm a hair on the hats. And he almost went for it. But he decided to stall instead and said, can I have until morning to think about it? And she giggled in a kind of an unnaturally, pretty girl giggle from this horrible, ugly creature and says, I'll give you your time. And she grabbed an hourglass with octopus tentacles that swirled around it for the supporting bars and flipped it on its end and said, you have until the morning. Enjoy your accommodations. As she turned into water and faded through the boards of the ship and went back into the ocean to supposedly do some nefarious deeds. All the while, the chaperone is holding on to him. So he had to find a way to escape. He ended up tricking the flesh golem into allowing him to go into a different room because this room freaked him out. Because this room is filled with a lot of freaky things. It's got the same sort of detritus and debris from all the other rooms of a typical, capsized ship. But this one is filled to the brim with all sorts of bizarre trinkets of, old silver mirrors that are broken and have mold growing underneath the glass, and the silver is all tarnished, or a random carving of a bear that looks like a 5-year-old did it, and all sorts of these bizarre trinkets fill the room. And these are, of course, the trinkets that the hag will use in combat should the players engage her in combat. In fact, I've written out 5 specific trinkets that she will use if attacked to try and repel the players. And should she get too low in health, less than a quarter of her health, then she will try that fading into water thing and abandon her lair in pursuit of a new one. And the players will have to find some way to either prevent that from happening or chase her down or something. But she's a hag. Hag's gonna run. So those trinkets that she will use in combat are a hand mirror that casts cloud of daggers when shattered. So she'll break a mirror over someone and it'll shatter into a bunch of, daggers in the air with the glass shards that will kind of float around, causing damage to people in the area. In one corner of her room, there's this big seashell that she uses as her cauldron, and it's got this bubbling liquid kind of constantly smoking over the edge, and she'll run over and pour that over onto the players, and that will cast acid splash onto the nearest hero. She also has this opaque bottle that she'll uncork and point at the players, and that'll cast Agonazar's Scorcher, this big line of fire that immediately shoots out of the bottle and burns the players. There's a piece of coral that she'll rip off of the barge that looks like it's growing out of it, and she'll crush it and sprinkle it over her head, and that will cast Armor of Agathis on her, giving her a bit of a buff. And then as well, a pufferfish that is hanging, a dried pufferfish hanging from a piece of fishing line. She'll rip it off and throw it to the players, and that will detonate in a cloud of black fungus. And that will effectively be Bane, the spell Bane on anyone within a 20-foot square radius of the explosion. And that's basically it. The assumption is the players will either kill the hag or the hag will escape. And in the reference sheet, I do have her as crushing a blue swirling bead strung through her hair, so she'll kind of reach up and grab something and crush it, and then start to liquefy. I didn't end up doing that for my playthrough because it was kind of her transportation method, was how she got in and out of the barge without being seen and everything. So I don't know, you'll have to see how it fits within your game and within your current context. But those are a couple of different ideas on how she does that. While she is a puddle, though, she moves at a speed of 10, so very slow, but can ooze between the cracks in the floor. I'd probably give her about 3 combat rounds before she's like fully out. Until then, the players can try and, maybe cast a fireball to try and evaporate her, or lightning to try and course it through, or I don't know. Players are creative. They'll always do something that you don't expect. Like my player. I'll finish up his story now. So he convinced the flesh golem to take him into the room with Mr. Hansy, because the room with the hag's trinkets was way too creepy for him. And he sat down on a little stool, and he just watched this octopus just constantly moving things around, as it had one eye on him and one eye just staring straight forward. And he cast Speak with Animals. So he was able to talk with the actual Mr. Hansy and not the hag speaking through him. And he started kind of learning, why are you here? He says, well, it's a job, it's a living, the whole Flintstones type sort of thing. He said, I'm the last of my kind. She promises to restore us if I keep on doing this. No more octopuses in this ocean. And the druid says, that doesn't sound right. Which, of course, it's not. It's a lie that the hag is telling him to keep him in her employ. One of her trades that she has done to try and have a buffer between her and anyone who comes to visit her. And he told the octopus, I will find my buddy who is a coastal druid, and I promise you we will get a female giant octopus and show you that you're not the last of your kind. And then at that point I had both of his eyes turned to look at him, and he's still sorting, and he says, if you do that, I will absolutely leave here. I will go jump right back into the ocean. And so the druid said, okay, great. Is there anything you can do? I don't want you to compromise your situation here, but is there anything you can do to help me get out of here? And he's speaking all this in octopus language, which I assume is like with the beak. And then the octopus was kind of sorting things around and moved its arms into 2 different spaces at the same time and brought them forward as if they were about to swap places on a shelf. And he accidentally shattered them over the head of the flesh golem that was just standing there staring at the druid. And the liquids intermingle in the air, and as they oxygenate, they explode in fire over this guy's head, and I had him take 1d4 damage. And he starts freaking out and trying to bat the flames off of his hair, which gives him disadvantage on his ability saves and attack options and everything. And then the druid was able to finish off the flesh golem from there. And after a quick cursory excursion in the ship to try and find anything valuable, he didn't feel comfortable taking anything from the hag's lair because he just couldn't tell if anything was magical or not, or cursed or not. And he ended up leaving the barge. And he went off to go find his coastal druid friend while the hag was giving him time. And he was going to try and make it back by dawn to try and deal with the hag with 2 druids now instead of just the one. So that was our story of how we ran through it. It went a very different direction than I was expecting, but I thought it was really, really cool. I really liked having this big, imposing bodyguard that was a little bit dopish, this construct with the... and I had him when he pinned him down on the table, drool coming out of his mouth. It was really gross, dripping onto the player. It was just a really spooky environment, and I thought it worked really, really well. In fact, I really don't even mind that we used a toned-down flesh golem, even though it was really strong and killed the player in 3 hits. I'm knocked unconscious. I think that was really important to show just how scary this place is and how mean these hags are. I thought it really went really well. So, as always, the reference sheet for this adventure is down in the description below. And if you run this, please let me know. Let me know what worked for you. Let me know if that reference sheet worked well for you. Does it have the right information in it? Or is there stuff that you were missing and kind of had to make up on the fly? I'd love to know so that I can continue to refine these and make them better. You might have also noticed that we don't have super good audio quality. I'm just running off of my webcam's microphone, unfortunately, and that's probably going to be the way it goes for the next little while. This is a hobby for me, and I just frankly don't have the money right now to go and buy a whole new microphone, which is a huge bummer for me. I really like the quality that it gave. This webcam is not terrible, but it's not exactly where I want it to be. But, you know, this is a hobby. It's not a job, so I unfortunately don't have the full setup that I would love to have. That being said, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Have a great time rolling around and dungeoning and dragoning, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.